Hi, I'm Lindsay Hosfield. Welcome to our Youngtimers community stories. I believe that the most valuable and meaningful insight a person can receive when facing early onset familial Alzheimer's disease is insight from our community, those who have faced this disease and continue to each and every day. We're going to be talking to a woman who has helped me and continues to serve as an inspiration and voice for our community. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to chat.
I was just thinking about when we first met. It was in Toronto, 2017. And I was sitting in the audience and they were taking audience questions, and you raised your hand and you brought up CRISPR, which is some gene editing technology. And back then it was like the hottest thing in science. And I was like, who is this woman? Because as a scientist, I knew what implications there were for early onset familial Alzheimer's disease because of the genetics. And I was like, I need to talk to this woman and get to know her and become her friend. And luckily I was able to do that. I just want to thank you for your friendship, because as I was going through my journey, we talked a lot, and your strength and insight have just really helped me. So I'm excited for others to have access to your words and advice as they navigate this really difficult situation of genetic testing. Thank you for agreeing to join us. Would you mind just sharing a bit of your story with us?
Sure. My grandmother passed from Alzheimer's, and my father also passed from Alzheimer's. In terms of genetic testing in particular, we didn't know that the PS1 mutation lived in our family until...
And that's presenilin 1, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
I was just always sort of concerned about my future possibility of having Alzheimer's. And as my dad was declining, my mother was really supportive and getting his blood banked to make sure that I could get his genetics tested in the future if I wanted to.
So she had a feeling that something was genetic.
I don't think that she had a feeling. I think that her love for me fostered her willingness to bank the blood so that as science progressed, regardless of if my dad was still around at that point or not, that I would have the ability to tap into that resource for information and understanding. I went to go see a genetic counselor and talked about the history of my family. We did the chart, and in my family, I don't have a family that's riddled with this disease. And also my immediate family of upbringing, we were very transient. And so we didn't have a strong connection with our extended family. So all we knew was about my grandmother and my dad. And so on its face, when I was talking with the genetic counselor, it's, well, you might have a propensity for late onset with ApoE or whatever, but it was probably pretty unlikely that you were going to have any determinative mutations because it would show up in your family more heavily. But because I was always so afraid of it, I thought I would like to know. And all that's to say, I got my dad's testing done at the urging of the genetic counselor, and it came back positive. And this was like 7 years ago now. This was in 2014. So forgive me if all of the particulars of the way
that's fine.
things played out are not crystal clear. But so I had this information about my dad, and I understood what the implications for me were, like the 50-50 chance, the near 100% penetrance if I would have this gene mutation. And at that point, it became really important to get long-term care insurance ahead of any testing I would have done. And then just life is busy too, right? So it was easy to think about the things that I needed to do first.
And would you mind sharing at what point in your life you were at? Were you married? Did you have kids?
I was already married. I'll be married 20 years this summer. And we did have young children, elementary school age children.
Okay.
And so we got everything in place, and then it was like, okay, I can proceed. And I knew even once I got the information about my dad that I would want this information for myself. It was just a matter of getting the other things in place so I could have this information for myself. And I did. I proceeded with it. I have 2 siblings, and they, of course, were unfamiliar that this gene even existed. I said, hey, I'm finding some stuff out about Dad's health,
Right.
that I'm going to move forward with some things about my health. And I framed it as, you knowing the particulars of any of this will be very impactful because it has to do with genetics. And you, by virtue of knowing any detail, would come to understand your own propensity or probability for certain things in your health. I wanted to keep it very general because I didn't want to force this information upon them. And both of them opted in. They were like, yeah, I want to know about Dad and I want to know about you. Proceeded with getting the testing done. And when I went to the appointment, my husband was with me. My mother actually came as well. And then I also had on standby my siblings.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very matter of fact. Just came in and said that I had the gene.
You have the mutation, the Presnell
yes.
mutation. Uh-huh.
Yes. And I immediately texted my siblings, telling them. And I remember being stunned. Mm-hmm. Wow. And of course, getting emotional about it. I definitely cried. And I remember we went to get some food after and being self-conscious. I'm a white woman with a fair complexion. And if I cry, it's incredibly obvious. I just remember feeling exposed at the place we were eating and just wanting to get home. But at the same time, by coming home, I didn't want my children to see that I had been upset.
Yeah.
In our community, there's a whole discussion about when to tell your kids, how to tell your kids. That's a whole other conversation. But I certainly knew as elementary schoolers, I wasn't going to come home and share this news with them.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like it's so hard for a lot of people. In your case, I feel like you just knew that you wanted to know. Mm-hmm. But I'd really like to explore that, like, how do you know that you're ready to find something like that out? A lot of people say you just know that you're ready. There's 3 camps of people. There's the people who like never, ever want to find out, right? There's the people who are, as soon as they find out it's in your family, they want to know. And then there's people on the fence who are like, today I feel like I could find out. And then tomorrow they're like, oh no, I can't. I really want to speak to those people who are on the fence. How do you know you're ready to find out your genetic mutation status?
Yeah. When I found out that my dad had the mutation, there was this sense of, it's not the right word to say gladness, but there was this sense of like the certainty of it that, okay, I can know for sure if I want to and be out from under this dark cloud, because this is the version that his mother had and he had. And so if I don't have it, it's likely that I will not get this, right? And so I really saw it as a half full as opposed to half empty. Wow, I have the opportunity to be free of this weight that has always niggled at me. And then I wasn't only thinking about the half full. I was also thinking, this is heavy stuff to know. But what do you do when you know heavy stuff? It provides accountability to live differently, to make plans. And I know this even more now that I'm 7 years out, that I do live differently. I love differently. It's a different posture towards life that this reality in which I live provides me accountability to have that disposition that if I didn't have that likely inevitable future, that I wouldn't be as deliberate about sleep, exercise, and eating. I wouldn't be as deliberate about relationships and telling people I love them and not taking flight seriously and having a sense of what's really important in life. It also provides a lot of motivation to be active in our community, to participate in research, for example, to think about all the ways that I can be advancing the fight against this disease. And you can do all that without knowing. And many people do that. But for me, There's also an element of self-awareness that it's not like you write a pro and con list that is the same for every person. There's a sense of, what do I know about myself and how do I operate best? And I operate best under certainty and planning and accountability. And knowing afforded me all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I will caveat all this by saying that I, 7 years out, am really living into all of what I just described, but I'm also asymptomatic. I don't know how I'm going to feel when symptoms start to show up. I know the biomarkers show up long before, so that's likely already happening in my system anyways, but when it
When you biomarkers, I just want to clarify for anybody who doesn't know what a biomarker is. So it can be a bunch of different things. It can be your cerebrospinal fluid, the proteins, the amyloid and the tau could be changing. You could have amyloid or tau in the brain. So biomarkers are just windows into your body indicating that there is something happening towards disease, but it hasn't manifested into symptoms yet. So that's what you mean by biomarkers, just to clarify, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know how I'll react if and when symptoms become more apparent. I am 41 and I have brain blips like any other person who's alive in the world. And so there is a sense of wondering when those happen, is that this showing up? Or is it just life and stress of COVID or whatever? And even when it does cross my mind, like maybe it's this, I have experienced a glimpse of what I might feel like if and when symptoms get stronger, because there is a sense of, oh, maybe that's an appearance of this. And it's okay. I don't know. I've given myself grace to be like, so what? So what if? It's okay. And then that serves as like another reminder of all the stuff I just described. Live like you want to live right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, you mentioned other categories of people who know they don't want to know. And I've had a conversation with my brother about this, and he was just like, I really admire your strength. I'm really glad for this path that you have taken and all that it's brought into your life. But for me, there's no way, I know myself well enough, this is my brother talking, there's no way that I could function on a daily basis knowing that this was living in me and was going to manifest. There's just no way. Mm-hmm. And so I respect that certainty in him too, that he operates better in the not knowing. Mm-hmm. So there's no easy answer. I think it's doing the self-work to know how you operate best.
Yeah, that's such great advice. I think really you need to turn inwards and listen to that voice, because even for those people in limbo, it could be that that voice is saying not now because it's not ready to know that information, but that there's a growing sense that information is going to be important to know in the future. So it could be some sort of like continuum.
Yeah. And you mentioned context before, like I was married. I did have children. I think about how this would play out in a dating scenario. What if you have this information about yourself? When would you share that with someone that you were getting emotionally intense with and were planning to perhaps spend your life with them? I mean, where on that spectrum do you inject this information? And how another big issue in our community is pregnancy. And do you just have a kid even knowing this? Or do you take measures to make sure that you go through IVF and you do the
implantation genetic testing
to make sure that you're creating someone that doesn't have this reality.
The mutation.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's, like a whole other conversation as well. I just don't know how I would have been in all sorts of situations, but particularly those, if I wasn't already married and had kids, would I have not wanted to know? I can't say. All I can say is my experience.
No, and I think it's helpful. And that's why I think we need to have these conversations with so many different people, so that others can relate. I found out about my dad when I was 17 and quickly figured out that I was at risk. Growing up with that information your whole life, your relationship to the disease and your own risk changes over time. Like how I thought about it in my 20s was very different than when I thought about it in my 30s. And I'm sure finding out in your 40s that this runs in your family is different. Context is also really important when you're making this decision.
Things that I could not have imagined in finding out is that I'm now thinking about when to tell my children with those same thoughts in mind. So as they meet their people, like, what duty do I have to inform them so they could inform their partner, or they could make decisions about their childbearing path? I didn't quite think that far out. And that sort of burdens me to think, even their choice of profession, maybe they would want to do something that was more oriented towards this disease if they knew this information. And am I robbing them by not telling them before they go into college, for example? I don't know. I just don't know. It's so fraught. And I don't think you can know all the different things that are going to come up along this journey.
Right. You mentioned that you organized long-term care insurance before you saw a genetic counselor, because once you know your status, you can't get that type of insurance. And it's some insurance and some healthcare situations, there is this law called GINA, which prevents genetic discrimination, but long-term care insurance and life insurance aren't covered by that. So that's why it's important to get those things. From a logistic standpoint, is there anything that was helpful to do before undergoing testing?
I think having a therapist ready that you have a relationship with, that you're talking about this. A genetic counselor is not a therapist.
Right.
To be able to talk with a therapist who can be that objective person about, why do I want to know? And just help these sorts of pieces of it out. You can do that with loved ones as well, but I know I tapped into a therapist after I knew that I had this, because it was definitely needed to deal with all of the emotions. I don't know that I got one leading up to it. And I think that could have been a good approach, to have, again, the clarity of thought about why you're doing this, but then also to have the established relationship. So after you do get the news, you can have a place that knows you to process it. I did find generally, even though I started the therapy after learning this news, that having an objective place where I could dump my reaction, my spouse's reaction, my just changing perspective. I shifted jobs pretty soon after I found out about this news. So I would just really encourage folks to consider getting a professional who is not a girlfriend, who is not a spouse, to help you with this.
Yeah, that's such great advice, because I feel like it feels like you're holding a secret, and it's not even a secret that you hold. It's like your whole family holds it. So it can almost be liberating to talk to a total stranger who has professional experience with working through very serious traumatic experiences. I reached out to a psychologist, therapist before I got testing, because I was one of those people who was in limbo, and they helped me figure out whether I was psychologically ready to find that information out. I just wanted to know that I could handle it. And I think it's so important to have that. Mental health, I feel like, is not spoken about a lot, and it's so important. So important.
Yeah.
It can make such a difference from something that could be very difficult to making it just a little bit less burdensome, to make sure that you have the best experience possible.
And we're both talking about it as individual people. There's this sense of autonomy, right? But I also think that if you are with a partner, navigating their views on finding out and conversing through that, and then also their preference, their reaction, and how that combines with yours as a couple. Just retrospect, I think that going through having some sessions with my spouse involved, that could have been really valuable, because I was in a situation where my spouse did not want to find out. And I said, thanks for your opinion, but I'm going to do this. And then after we found out, I certainly went through a mourning period and grieved, but I really found the knowledge liberating.
Mm-hmm.
And my spouse found the knowledge as constraining and burdensome,
Mm-hmm.
and just carried the grief a lot longer than I did. And that showed up in just different ways in our lived relationship, right? You have to think about what you want. But if you're with a person, I think you have to take their needs into account. And that doesn't mean you don't go forward if you do want it for yourself, but maybe you build a better infrastructure around how to deal with the fallout of the difference.
Yeah, because it isn't just you at that point. You have a family together.
Yeah. And similarly, if you're going to have children or you already have children, like all of this plays into that. And they're a part of, obviously, the kids that you have made or will make. And even as it ripples out, who you tell, if you have couple friends, does this become a reality in those relationships? And what about the preferences of the partner?
Right.
It has so many rippling impacts that, and I think my spouse is not a caregiver at this point, but caregivers or partners in general, there's so much emphasis on the individual whose body holds the mutation. And I'm not saying that's not good, but I just think there needs to be a little bit more of an attention to relationship and community as it relates to this information and these choices.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So you touched on this briefly, but I feel like you're now on the other side of it, right? You found out, you know, your status, right? And a lot of people are standing on the other side in front of the door and wondering what it's like on the other side. So can you just walk through what it was like to find out your status?
Sure. I described the immediate reaction, tears, sorrow, understandable. It's actually in a really high stress, busy job whose season was in peak demand at the point that I was getting this done. And taking time off work was significant that I had to explain. It wasn't just, oh, I have an appointment, I'm going to be gone. It was a circumstance where all hands needed to be on deck. I wouldn't necessarily advise sharing this type of information with your workplace, right?
Right.
But again, I didn't know, and I generally tend to be optimistic and maybe naive. And they were actually quite lovely. I'm not trying to suggest that anything went awry in my workplace, but I did end up telling my direct supervisor and then also the overall head of the sector of the organization that I worked in. In retrospect, I wouldn't recommend that, but I felt like I had to because I'm not a good hider. And I think that's something that has come out of this long trajectory of knowing this, that I have a better understanding of who I would tell and whose rightful business this is, as opposed to just thinking like, I need to tell the truth, like the flat truth. Now I think about, you don't talk about intimate topics with other people, whether that's sexuality or financials. For some people, that's religion. For some people, that's politics. And that this very clearly falls into those realms. And that it's totally appropriate to not divulge this level of information really with anybody. And I didn't know that at the outset. Felt like I would be hiding or being untruthful somehow. So back to finding out, I shared with my workplace, and I want to say I had taken the day off of testing and I took the day off after, just to really live into mourning. I was really sad. And there was a movie out, The Fault in Our Stars, I think is what
Oh,
it's
yeah.
called. It was about a young woman who was dying from cancer. And so my spouse and I went to go see that movie the next day. And because I wanted to cry, I wanted to feel the sadness, to have like camaraderie with other stories that felt tragic and ill-timed, just to give vent to what is really tragic, to get this news that is traumatic. I didn't want to stuff it or not feel like it's just really healthy, I think, to fully face hard news and allow your body to feel it, allow your emotions to process it. And I wanted to support that. And I remember it was like an earlier movie. The next day we had gone to a matinee or something. And there were these adolescents who were sitting in the row behind us. And my husband started to cry in the film as well. And like seriously cry. And he's not much of a crier. And I knew that this film was generating that in him because of what was real in me, this news that we had just gotten. And I remember him trying to stifle it. And I turned to him as I was like crying myself. And I can't remember his exact words, but I remember it was something like, there's no way that I'm going to sob in front of adolescents in this movie theater. So anyways, I gave myself time to feel sad. Again, I didn't see my therapist the next day or anything, but that was also an outlet for me that I'm on the trajectory of dealing with these emotions. And very soon thereafter, after intensely seeking, giving vent to these emotions and not moving to fix it mode yet, I'm very much a planner and a action oriented. Let's fix it. Let's have some agency and do something about what our problem is, whatever it is.
Right.
And I don't know, it might have been, I think it was a Thursday, and I took off the Friday, and then so I had the weekend before I actually had to return to work, maybe. That feels accurate. And so that weekend, I got all the books off the shelf of Barnes and Noble that were related to this, to Alzheimer's. And I started just reading what is to be done. I also started making calls because I had such a fear of this dark cloud of Alzheimer's. I actually knew that Diane existed, or maybe actually what happened is I called a local chapter of the Alzheimer's Association or a nearby medical environment that had an expert there who knew about Alzheimer's.
Okay.
I remember calling this woman, having a chat with her, who then told me that I think I already knew about Diane, but she reiterated Diane.
Which is the Dominantly Inherited Alzheimer's Network, which is running clinical trials for early onset Alzheimer's disease, just so everybody else. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
And all that's to say is I had my first visit for my intake in August of the year I found out, and I found out in June.
Okay, wow.
You
worked quickly. Wow.
I actually missed my son's birthday that year, which I feel badly about, but I was like, I'm getting in. I'm getting started.
Yeah. I think we have this tendency to numb ourselves to hard, sad things or to compartmentalize them rather than embrace them. So I see the importance of doing that work early on so it doesn't resurface at some other point where you didn't take the time. Speaking about time, if somebody's listening who's has the opportunity to set it up the way they want it to, would you recommend taking a certain amount of time off of work to know this news?
Yeah, I've talked to others who have done it more methodically, and I think I would take at least a week if I could, finding out the news at the beginning of the week. I think if you do have children, being able to get away with just you and your spouse, doing something that's pleasurable for you both away from the children. So again, you can process it and love on one another. I've been in communication with someone who didn't tell other people that this testing was actually going on, even their closest intimates. People generally knew, okay, so-and-so is going to be getting tested, but other people outside their most intimate bubble didn't know. So there wasn't then pressure to share. And then definitely, as I said before, like not sharing, even if you have the inclination to share, really have some self-control and maybe set a timeline for when you will, but do not allow yourself to do it right away, because you can never undo that, right? And not only for the sake of self-protection, family protection, but this news can really be burdensome to other people. What are they supposed to do with it, right? How are they supposed to interface with you? And how might that new knowledge in a friendship, how does that then affect the friendship? I don't know.
Right.
I made the mistake of sharing in a couple of situations. Again, because I have this hyper honesty. I have to be transparent or I'm being a liar. And I would do that differently. Again, even if I would choose to tell someone, at least just building a buffer so I'm not in the fresh reaction time period, that I can have more of a thoughtful process of who should I tell for my sake, but also how will this affect them? Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because I remember talking to somebody about that when she found out, and she told people, it's like she said, I had to be the one to help them cope with knowing that knowledge. And it's just like, it's not how it should be. Like, they should be the ones who are lifting your burden from you and not adding the burden of you, like leading them through that information and assuring them that everything's going to be okay. You have to know your relationships. You have to know yourself, and don't feel pressured to share that information. That's a privilege to know that. And people should know that who deserve to know. They should know that knowledge is privileged knowledge.
Yeah, I think also this came up. We have a one time a month at-risk asymptomatic support group through Youngtimers, and we were discussing some of the disappointments that have come about when people, not even about knowing your status, but just people who don't get a parent who's going through this. But specifically, one of the questions that came up for me that I thought was really helpful in that support group setting was, what are your expectations for someone who you would tell? Not just unburdening yourself, even if they are a good friend, what would it be like? What would their behavior and care towards you be like when you do share this sacred news with them? And maybe getting a grip on that yourself before you tell anybody. If it's just setting the stage for, I don't exactly know what I'm going to need, but I'm going to want to have some regular check-ins and some honest communication through this. That was really a good question for me to ponder, and frankly, further established my posture that I'm not telling anybody. Because my most intimates do know, and I'm getting what I need from them. I can't foresee a circumstance where I would need something from someone else. And further, there's something called stereotype threat that you can live into, right? You live into a stereotype about yourself. I know for me, if somebody knows, sometimes even suspects that I have this, there can be a self-defeating behavior where I begin to live into that sort of, like what I think I would act like if I were positive and a little bit symptomatic, like dropping words because I'm anxious about their perception of how I am functioning. And I have enough performance anxiety just as a regular human being.
Right.
I don't need the additional layer of me thinking that you're judging me or evaluating me on this level. So I know myself well enough that I don't need that extra anxiety.
Right. It's such a good point. It's probably important to have conversations with people about your expectations for revealing that knowledge. Certainly for family members who that knowledge is going to impact them, asking them if they even want to know, and then telling them, if I tell you, I don't want to be judged and I want to be supported. In my experience, it's almost easier to tell strangers than it is to tell family or friends. And that's why I think Youngtimers in this community has been so important and could be important for people who are going through this process, because it's like any other traumatic experience. Like, when somebody's lost a parent or a loved one, it's their friends who have lost their parent or loved ones who reach out to them and check in and do the right things and say the right things, versus people who just don't get it. They don't know what it's like to go through that. The same with somebody's had a miscarriage. Like, the people who have had miscarriages know what to say and what to do to help you through that. And I think telling maybe somebody within our community, hey, I'm undergoing testing, you're going to get those people who have already gone through testing to reach out to you and check in and tell you the right things. So in that sense, maybe it's working out who are the right people to tell. And maybe it's somebody within the community who has already gone through it, because they're going to know exactly what you need without you having to lay out those expectations and being worried about being judged.
Yeah, I think the only difference is if you're pre-test and you're thinking, should I or should I not get tested? And someone in our community has already been through that process, but they're either positive or negative. Just play it out. Like, I'm considering getting tested. I don't know yet. I get the perspective of someone who is positive. And then let's say I'm negative after actually going through testing. That creates sort of an interesting dynamic, or it can, of survivor's guilt from someone who doesn't have it and then feels bad. Like, why me? It can create a real kinship if you do both have it, right? Like, I've been there, I totally get it. It really forges like a new depth of understanding. And similarly, let's say you reach out to somebody in the community who doesn't have it, and then same thing, the person considering getting tested ends up not having it. Great, we can both talk about whatever comes up for people who don't have it. Or the person does have it, and then that, again, is a separation. So I think we all need to be aware in this community that there is stuff to deal with if you're positive or you're negative. I play out that dynamic because it's not so easy just to say engaging somebody in our community.
Trying to develop friendships and relationships within the community could lead to that, right? To that support. So I'm just curious, because we talked about what it's like to find out your status, but let's say somebody has just found out their status and it's positive for a mutation. That means they have the gene. You talked about how you're almost a kindred spirit with these people. What would be the first things that you would say to this person, having found out that they're positive?
I would definitely suggest taking the time to engage the emotions of that. But then also caveating it with, this was my experience and this was useful for me. Do what feels right for you in your own body, in your own environment. Listen to your needs, and then just say, I'm here. I'm an ally. I've been living with this for 7 years, and there are a lot of stages of coming to acceptance and living within it. So I'm a resource should you want that resource. I think that's what I would say.
Okay. I'm going to shift a little now. Can you talk about what productive grieving is and how it has helped you face some of those challenges?
Okay. So productive grieving. First, living into the sorrow and the trauma of this, and cultivating awareness of how that grief is going to show up now throughout your life. It's important to really dive into the first time news, being aware and almost expecting difficulties, whether it's sorrow or anger or rage, to show up throughout living life in the state of knowing, which doesn't mean it's a negative thing. Like I've said, I am living a more liberated, rich, productive life given this news, but it doesn't mean that I'm not in touch with rage sometimes or sadness. For me and my spouse, like when we go to the annual visit.
This is for the clinical trial?
Yeah.
Where you get like, they do brain scans and they do cognitive testing and that sort of stuff, right?
I mean, we inevitably would end up getting in a fight, like a pretty serious fight on that trip. And it was really just the emotional stuff around this reality that maybe wasn't right in our face all the time. But then you go to St. Louis and you're in all these machines and having these cognitive tests, and it's really like front and center. So that's grieving, but I'm struck by the productive grieving. Talking about it, I always like to talk about something. I think it's really healthy. So even out of those arguments, we've been able to foster a deeper connection. And again, trying to approach it, but then giving space to the person who isn't ready to approach it in the same way. Like for me, I've been to every family conference that I could attend. For me, that was really important, to be able to be with other people who got it, to be able to engage the researchers and the science. But my spouse just started coming with me recently, and that was his timeline. And I had to respect that, even though like I wanted him to come with me sooner. He wasn't ready for that. What else? Productive grieving. I think being aware of emotions in your body when they do arise, and again, giving outlet to them. A good cry in the shower when stuff comes up for you. I'm a big believer in exercise and even maybe having a punching bag. That all feels productive. I don't see a therapist now. I don't feel like I have a pressing need for one. I don't recall how long I went on with this therapist that I mentioned when I found out, but it seemed like I had reached the end of what I needed from that experience and just phased out of it. But again, maybe there will be another season of life if and when symptoms appear for me that I'll need an objective space to process that. So I think self-awareness and being open to what comes up for you, and then being deliberate about not stuffing what comes up for you and giving it release. I think that would be productive grieving.
Yeah. No, I've heard you write about it and talk about it before. It is important to recognize the emotions that you're feeling because there's probably a reason why you're feeling them. So I think that's great.
And this past year has been so heavy on so many levels, and I've tried to engage in body work, and we've chatted about this too, where sometimes you can't even point it at it. Like there's tension for me and there's sorrow for me. There's a whole lot of crap going on in society, in my community, in my personal life. And so I don't think cognitively we can always point, like, why am I feeling this heaviness in my body or this tension in my shoulders? I can't be like, oh, that's the XYZ dimension of grief. But I've done like some meditations where you're really deliberate in thinking about where that heaviness or sorrow sits in your body. And then there was one really great one that you tried to get a grip on the place in your body where you were feeling the angst. And then you also had a sense of kindness in your body. Where does your body feel good? And then you just allow them to sit next to one another, to just live alongside one another. And what does it look like for the kind part of your body to be kind to the part of your body that's carrying the weight? And they went on with some more visualizations, which were really therapeutic. I'm still learning how to do this.
That's really great. As much as I am a scientist, I do think that there's a lot that we don't know about the brain, and your mental state really plays a big role in your body and how different things manifest. So I totally agree with that. Family dynamics can come into play as this is a hereditary disease, right? Do you have any recommendations for talking to family about this disease?
Yeah, I guess it depends on what your goal is. There can be lots of goals related to who you tell or who you approach. So one goal that comes to mind has to do with actually advancing the fight against this disease. There was another conference where I asked, I'm totally blanking on his name.
Bateman.
Dr. Bateman. See, maybe there's a moment. Oh, God.
No, that's just regular.
I stood up and I asked, how can we co-produce scientific knowledge with you? We as research participants, what are the tactics that we can employ to continue to produce knowledge in this field and ultimately create meaningful interventions that stave off symptoms or cure this disease? And I remember he said, first, stay involved. Don't drop out, because your involvement gives the study power, right? There's this concept of statistical power in research where numbers matter. And even my one body that joins and stays involved to completion in a study and then joins the next one, that creates statistical power to provide answers. So I'm doing that. I have control over that, right?
Right.
And then he also said, get more people involved if possible, something to that effect. And the third one was advocacy. But in terms of who to tell, getting more people involved in your own family could be something to consider. I, at one point, considered generating basically like a form letter to my extended family on my dad's side of the family, who I am not close with, who I don't have an established relationship with. He had several siblings, and I don't even know where all of them are located, not just the siblings, but their offspring. But I thought about drafting a letter to say something about, I'm involved in research. I've learned about dad's health, which could have implications for you if you would want to know about it. Something that would allow them to opt in and wouldn't burden them with knowing. Maybe that would increase participation in Diane's. I haven't done it yet. It's easy to put off, right?
Yeah.
But that's something that I've considered. Another goal I have is not wounding my children with this reality. And I'm in the throes of thinking about that, given my kids aren't in elementary school at this point. They are older. And I haven't come to the conclusion. I think I've talked to a lot of other people about this, all who have done it different ways. And then I come back to my spouse and I talk about it with my spouse, and we lay out the factors and the dimensions. And up till now, it has consistently been like, our conclusion is the time is not right, not now. And I think for me, I will continue to do that, to continue to revisit periodically as it comes up, as life continues. I will continue to have conversations with other people who know what it's like to be in this circumstance and who have made choices around it and have had experience regarding the consequences of those choices. And then I will take that into account, what is true for me, what is right for me, talk about it with my spouse, and also consider the personalities of my children. One thing is very clear for me, that when I tell my kids, it will be plural. It will not be one kid.
Right.
And then telling that kid, you can't tell your sibling.
Right.
Because I want them to have one another to commiserate with, and for our family to be able to discuss it openly. So that is one point, that I wouldn't do it until the least common denominator is ready in our family for everybody to know. That's one piece of the decision, but in terms of when and how, boy, I'd love to hear some future podcasts on this topic from other people.
Yeah. Let's try to work on that. We've heard from child psychologists where they say, talk about it like you would sex, like the disease, about like age appropriate, because there's this element that you don't want the child to feel lied to. But as somebody who found out at the age of 17, I feel so grateful that I had my entire childhood like normal. I don't know what that would have looked like. So it's hard for me to say what would that have looked like if I had known earlier. I guess I could ask my brother, who was 12 at the time when he found out, because my dad was sick. It's not like we could hide it.
Right. In those circumstances, yeah, it becomes important to be able to talk about what's happening with a sick individual. Yeah.
Right. I've heard from another woman, and she's really struggling because her spouse doesn't want to tell, and she does. And it's hard because they have children at different ages. They could have boyfriends and girlfriends, and the whole family planning aspect of having a hereditary disease comes into play, but then their youngest isn't probably ready to know that information. So I think you said there's not really a right answer. Each individual, each family is different, each child is different. So I think there's a lot of exploration on this topic that we can do to help people figure that out. So I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. It's been a long chat, but there was so many just great pieces of advice and insight. And I always walk away from our conversations just really inspired. Thank you for taking the time and opening up about like difficult things. Like you said, in our day-to-day, we don't have to confront this disease. You have soccer pick up and drop off, and you got to make something for dinner, and it's not like you're always thinking about it, but there are certain days when you are confronted by it, and I just appreciate that you're willing to confront it.
Thanks for inviting me. It's always cathartic to just be able to have space to have these conversations.